with others. This is component number 4, where we're going to be talking about site visit and scoring when we think about the redesignation process. Again, this is our, I'm sorry. Oh, this is our last of the redesignation process webinar series. So we have recorded component 1, component 2, and component 3 as well. And then we've also recorded the overall redesignation process as a whole. And so all of that webinar series will be able to be viewed at a later date. My name is Kristen McQueen. I'm the STEM Relationship Manager with the Tennessee STEM Innovation Network, and I currently manage our redesignation and designation process. So definitely feel free to jot down my email. It'll also be on this last slide, but as your school embarks on this redesignation process, I'll be your point of contact. So if you need support or have any questions or concerns as you start working through these documents, definitely feel free to reach out to me. So today we're really going to break down component 4, which is that site visit and understanding the new scoring protocol. We'll talk about a roadmap of redesignation just to give you a holistic overview of the process, and then we'll go over some additional supports. As I go through this, please feel free to unmute if we do get to a point where you do have questions. It doesn't bother me at all for you to come off mute and ask a question, or you can also throw it in the chat. But as your school has been designated, a lot can happen. And within that 5-year period, we know that we're going to have ups and we're going to have downs. And this is really your school's opportunity to showcase how STEM and STEAM culture has been able to support your school over time. And the goal of the redesignation process is to outline what has occurred in your school during that 5-year period since STEM designated, and how STEM has been a part of your educational identity. So really, this is an opportunity to really highlight those highs and lows. And we know that we're going to see highs and lows on that. We know that most all of our schools within this 5-year period experienced COVID, and it had an impact on your programming as well. So that's definitely something that we expect to see. And you're definitely encouraged to be able to highlight those highs and lows, because I think it shows how schools were able to combat those barriers and grow from those lows. Understanding the redesignation process, we first have to backpedal to recognizing that the original Tennessee STEM and STEAM designation process was really created to award and recognize schools that are doing this exemplary work within their building, and being able to recognize those schools by allowing them to earn designation. And that certification is valid for 5 years. And when schools start to reach that 5-year mark, we do encourage schools to reapply for STEM and STEAM school designation. And this is just in order to verify that that primary focus for learning is still remains centered around STEM and STEAM principles. Although schools can elect not to reapply, they would no longer be considered a designated school in the eyes of the state. However, we do hope that all of our schools choose to continue down this pathway of integrating STEM or STEAM within their building. I always like to share some tips in getting started as you move into thinking about this process, whether you were designated in 2018 or 19, 20, or 21. And that's locating your school's original designation application and that final feedback form. I have shared in previous webinars that if your school was designated prior to 2021, then we do not have your school's original designation application, because we no longer use the platform that was utilized in those previous years. But we do have schools' final feedback forms. So if your school is starting to gather up some of these documents and you can't locate that final feedback form, definitely feel free to reach out to me and I can get you a copy of that. But those 2 pieces of information will really help drive the leadership team and the faculty in the right direction. Being able to review and look over those documents and being able to highlight areas of strengths and areas of weaknesses, and then having the opportunity to review your STEM action plan. We hope that this has been an action plan that has traveled with you all 5 years that the school has been designated, and it's something that has been looked at frequently and revised and changes as different mandates come down the pipeline. So having that STEM action sustainability plan, as well as that original application, that feedback form, those will really be the driver in completing this process. So again, if your school needs that final feedback form, definitely feel free to reach out to me. All right, so we're going to dig into component 4, which we'll talk about the site visit and the scoring. The site visit you're going to learn is very similar to the site visit from the original designation application, but we have made some pretty significant changes to the scoring protocol. But with the site visit, the original designation application included a school visit and an opportunity for us to meet with the STEM leadership team in order for us to kind of ask clarifying questions and learn more about the school culture. And so with the redesignation process, those two pieces will also be included as well. So there will be a short visit to be able to reconnect and further build our relationship across the network. And it's an opportunity for the redesignation review team to follow up on any lingering questions that they may have after your application was reviewed and be able to provide coaching and feedback when we see that it is appropriate. So with the site visit, again, those components will include a school tour and a STEM leadership team conversation. And so I've broken these two down just a little bit for you. So when we think about the school tour, schools will have the opportunity to showcase numerous capacities of your building. And this is in no way a have-to list, a finalized list. I do always like to just throw a couple of things out there to get schools thinking on the right track. However, you have participated in a school tour before, and I'm sure since becoming a designated school, you have opened your door and your facilities to numerous other types of tours. We're really looking into classrooms, if you have outdoor spaces, labs, hallways, anything that you can think of and that you feel like the redesignation review team should see that really will reflect your school's identity and the culture of STEM and STEAM that's happening in your building. You all have full creativity to kind of plan out that school tour and take the redesignation review team around. And with the STEM leadership team conversation, again, this is really just an opportunity for us to follow up on any lingering questions. It's always nice to have multiple stakeholders that are represented within that STEM leadership team. So having community members present or parents present, multiple different teachers present, it's always nice to be able to speak to a multitude of stakeholders to hear the impact that STEM has had on your building within the last 5 years. And just like with the original designation application, your school will receive a detailed feedback form outlining all of the application components that you'll be able to use as a driving force as you think about 5 to 10 years down the road. In component number 3, we talked a lot about future casting and thinking about where your school is going to be in 5 to 10 years. And so this feedback form will really help you drive those goals that you've created in component number 3 when we think about future casting. Right, so next we're going to dive into scoring. And as I go through this, if you have any questions, please let me know. But we're going to look at 2 different sections of scoring of the redesignation application. And when we think about the original designation application as a whole, there were 5 major attributes. And infrastructure is really the only component or attribute that we made significant changes to. And with this, in this section, it's been redesigned into reflective questions that are answered in a variety of formats throughout the application. So within infrastructure, it's going to ask you to provide some narratives. It's going to prompt you with some planning questions. It's going to ask you to create that visual timeline that we talked about when we dug down into component 1. And it really is where your school tells their STEM and STEAM story is in that infrastructure section. And this is the only section in the redesignation application that differs from the original application. With this, applicants are being provided the same information. We've just put it in a new format so that you're able to reflect, plan, and assess what's happened over the last 5 years. And so we'll look at what that looks like. And so infrastructure for this particular redesignation is made up into three major components. You have reflective questions, so you're going to be looking for strongest and weakest indicators, and you're going to be looking at growth over time. We have future casting questions, which identifies 4 different topics within those narratives, which will talk about your STEM leadership team, your school identity, innovate, and modeling. And then that third major component is the timeline of events. And that's where you'll see your visual model come into play, where you've created a timeline that shows the ups and downs, the changes over the last 5 years, and being able to link in artifacts to that timeline as well. And so you can see that we have broken it into a point system ranging from 0 to 1. So it's either schools addressed all of these components or schools did not address all of these components. And so you can see here that it's 3, 4, and 3. So 3, talking about that you've addressed the strongest, weakest, and growth over time. 4 is referring to the 4 topics that are listed in future casting. And then 3 here is whether the visual timeline is created, evidence is linked into that timeline, and they're listed any significant impacts that have happened on that timeline as well. So again, it's either you meet it or you don't meet it, and that's how those point values are addressed there. So again, infrastructure is really the biggest change because we've lumped in several different pieces into infrastructure. And then when we move into thinking about the other attributes from the original designation application, we're left with curriculum and instruction, professional development, achievement, and community partners. And all of those are going to be scored using the original rubric from the initial STEM or STEAM designation and process. Again, we have switched to using that 0 to 1. So on the original application, you were used to seeing early, developing, accomplishing, and model. And so really we've lumped early and developing together, and we've lumped accomplishing and model together. So schools will receive 0 points for scoring in the early or developing piece, and that does not meet their requirement to earn redesignation. And schools will receive 1 point in the accomplishing or model level, and that does meet the expectation for redesignation. So I did put together an example because I wanted to really break this out for you. And this example that I'm going to show you does have some zeros on it. Obviously, this particular one that I'm going to show you would not meet the requirement to earn redesignation, but I wanted to give you a nice display of those. So I've taken attribute number 2, which is curriculum and instruction, and there are 7 sub-attributes within that. So it goes all the way from 2.1 to 2.7, and you can see that the total possible points for this particular section is 7 points. And you can see that this example is showing that 5 points were earned. So with this section, all of this is scored based off of the evidence that gets submitted within component number 2, where we're talking about artifacts. So as you're gathering artifacts, make sure that these artifacts, the 10 artifacts that you choose, you do have an opportunity to showcase curriculum and instruction all the way to community partner connections, because all attributes do need to be hit within those 10 artifacts. Does anybody have any questions about scoring?
No, I think we're good.
Perfect. All right, so lastly, we'll talk about the points that are possible to earn. So in elementary and middle school has the opportunity to earn 16 points. You do have to earn at least 14 of those points to earn redesignation. And then high schools have the opportunity to earn a total of 17 points, and they need to get at least 15 of those. So it kind of breaks out how each rubric attribute is scored. The example that I showed you again was in curriculum and instruction. So again, possible points out of that is 7. And then you can see that infrastructure with those 3 major components is worth 3 points. And then everything else is scored using the original designation application. All right, so we're going to recap real quick what component 4 looks like. That site visit will include a school tour and a conversation with the STEM leadership team. The scoring is now based on a 0 to 1 point scale with values ranging from 1 to 7 throughout. And all schools will receive that detailed feedback form that can be utilized to further the programs that you've put in place within your building. I do always like to show in every webinar I've showed this, but just that gives schools an opportunity to review the roadmap to earning redesignation. And prior to your redesignation year, you're going to want to start meeting with your leadership team, reviewing all of those original documents, whether it's your application, your feedback form, your action plan, and then intent to applies, and the application will open up in January. And schools will have really from January to September to work through that application. And the application is due mid-September. And then we'll start scheduling site visits in December, and a notification will come in January. So it really is kind of a January to January process. We will we will put together a press release for schools to be able to celebrate and bask in that joy of earning redesignation, since it does happen a little ahead of designation. But we still will celebrate those schools at the Tennessee STEM Innovation Network Summit that's in May. So you won't have to keep it a secret for 4 or 5 months, because that would be really hard to do. I always put in our FAQ page as well. The redesignation application, we're using a platform called Slide Room. So this platform will probably be new to a lot of schools going through this process early on. It is really super easy friendly. We've been using it for the past 3 years. We've received a lot of good feedback on it, and we'll send you all the instructions on getting started with that. I know you've heard me say STEM and STEAM throughout every single webinar, and that's because this past year we did allow schools to elect whether they wanted to be STEM or STEAM. So as your school kind of goes through this process and you review everything that's happened within the last 5 years, if you have developed a culture in those 5 years that really support the arts, then by all means you are able to self-select STEAM as you go through this redesignation process. And we will personally invite schools when it is their time to apply for redesignation. We never want schools to stress or worry about when they should actually start working towards this. So we will send an invitation to let schools know that their time is coming near of needing to prepare for redesignation. And again, locate those original applications, locate those original feedback forms. Those will be the driver in completing this process. This is the final series of our webinar series around the redesignation process. So now on the website, instead of Zoom link, you'll actually see a recording, and you'll be able to rewatch these at any point in time as your faculty moves into this process together. Do we have any questions?